Hi friends, Will Davis Jr. here. It's great to see you. Welcome to what is day 10 now of lessons from or conversations about the Old Testament. Thanks for joining in. You can always send cards, questions, comments, and complaints to seniorpastor@acfellowship.org. Today, the call of Abraham. The first 11 chapters of Genesis kind of set the foundation of how the planet got to be the way it be. The planet got to be the way it be with the one we discussed yesterday, the confusing in the languages of the Tower of Babel. Chapter 12 focuses in now on God's relationship to the planet through the nation of Israel and ultimately the people of Israel, the spiritual Israel, the church. So Genesis 1 through 11 are really the introduction to the whole Bible. As because of the flood and because of Babel and because of sin, this is the way the planet is, and this is how it got the way it is. Chapter 12 begins God's story of redemption. So we turn a corner today, and we get into the story of what God is going to do about what happened in Genesis 1 through 11. Okay? And it begins with a man named Abram. Abraham is what he becomes, but Abram. Listen to this passage. I got to put my glasses on so I can see this. This is Genesis chapter 12. 1 through 3. Now the Lord said to Abram, go to your country and from your relatives and from your father's house into the land in which I will show you. I'll make you a great nation. I will bless you. I'll make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you and curse the one who curses you I will curse. And in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. That's quite a promise. So Abraham was living with his father. Abraham was living with his father, and in the region of Ur, which is basically Iraq. And his father decides to move to Canaan. We don't know if his father felt a call of God or not, but his father decides to move to Canaan, the land of what is now Israel. And he makes it as far as Haran, which is basically modern-day Turkey, and he stops there. And so Genesis 11 ends with Abraham and his father's people in Haran. And either before or in Haran, Abraham gets this call from God. And he says, if you'll come with me, he didn't say where. He said, if you'll come with me, I'm going to make a great nation out of you. And this is the beginning of the covenant promise, the Abrahamic covenant as it's known. That Abraham, look up in the heavens, you're going to have more descendants than the stars in the heavens. And that's the people of Israel who populated the earth from this day forward. And now the spiritual Israel, the nation of God, which is the church, which includes all of us, the grafted in Jews who are formerly Gentiles. That's us. And so he says, I'm going to bless you, I'm going to defend you, and he says, all the nations of the earth will be blessed through you. Well, that's the promise of Christ. So we've got in Genesis chapter 3 a promise of Christ that the seed of Eve will crush the seed of Satan, the serpent, and here's another one, that God's going to do something through this one man, Abram, and through his wife, Sarah. They'll bless all the nations of the earth. That's the Abrahamic covenant. It's a big one, and it sets up the creation of the nation of Israel. But it required Abraham walking away from the security of his father and his father's household, either there in Ur or there in Haran, and keeping going on the journey to this place he'd never been, to Canaan. Abraham gets to Canaan and sets up worship at a place called Bethel. He names it Bethel, the house of God. So this is obviously one of the most significant chapters. We're going to spend a couple of days in Genesis chapter 12 because it's a pivotal chapter. So much is established here, not just the covenant of God's relationship with Israel and later the church, but also the gospel of you're saved by faith and not by what you do is introduced in just a couple of chapters. So we'll get there as well. So here are some lessons from this Abrahamic call. Number one, God's always working. The world's a mess. Even at the end of Genesis 11, the world's a mess. And God has a plan. And even though most people couldn't see it, God was tapping somebody on the shoulder. When the people are held captive for 400 years in Egypt, God has a plan. And he's raising up a young man named Moses to be their deliverer. He's always working. And I don't know what you're going through right now, but God is always working and God has a plan. And is he raising up somebody or he's raising up something? Maybe he's raising up you to be the solution. Secondly, don't despise the day of small beginnings. Solomon teaches us this. Abraham's one man, but look what he became. Abraham was one man, and by the time this thing gets going, he and his wife are too old to have kids. But God said, you're going to have more kids than in the stars in the heavens. So don't despise the day of small beginnings. Trust what the Lord is doing. And even though something starts off really infantile, it can become a great nation. It can change history. Don't despise the day of small beginnings. And finally, many great works of God require a departure, and specifically a departure in faith. Abraham, I need you to leave what you know. I need to leave your dad and your people and your inheritance and your riches. I need you to come with me to a place you've never seen and trust me. Most of you in your walk of faith have had to do that. Most great beginnings, most great works have at their front point a departure from a previous security point in faith. Susie and I had to leave a really great church in Fort Worth and to come back to Austin, which was our home. We had no problem coming home, but we didn't have a church to come to. We had to leave some security we had here in Austin and some job opportunities I had here in Austin and burn those bridges to come to Austin and start a church that we didn't know would make it or not. And it's Austin Christian Fellowship, and we're now, almost 30 years into the run. Yay, God. But that required faith. Most of you have had to make departures in faith for something you believe was greater. That's what God calls you to do. Most significant works of God that he will do in you and through you and for you and by you will require a departure in faith from what you know to what you don't know. That keeps you desperate, that keeps you dependent, and it sets him up to work and get the glory. Welcome to the Call of Abraham. Today we begin the rest of the story of how God works through Israel to reveal himself to the nations and ultimately the church. Yay, God. Whew, it's good stuff. Lord, thank you. Bless my viewers today. Thank you for Abraham's obedience. Thank you for how you worked in something small to make it something great. Do the same in us, please. And I pray in your name. Amen. See you tomorrow.